Welcome to the Here's Waldo podcast, where we sit down with top visionaries and creatives in the video game industry. Together, we'll unravel their journeys and learn more about the path they're forging ahead. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Mentos, founder and CEO of Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique video game recruitment firm. This is the Here's Waldo podcast. In every episode, we dive deep into conversations with creatives, founders, and executives about what it takes to be successful. You can expect to hear valuable lessons from their journey and get a glimpse into the future of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Here's Waldo Recruiting, a boutique recruitment firm for the game industry. We value quality over quantity, transparency, communication, and diversity. We partner with companies, creatives, and programmers to understand the why behind their needs. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a thank you to Wallace Poulter for introducing us. Wallace knows everybody and is an industry legend. Today, we have Anthony Castoro with us. Anthony is the CEO and co-founder of Simulation Theory, owner of Protagonist Games, and chairman of High Def Entertainment. Some people ask why he starts so many companies. Anthony believes there are a lot of problems to solve in our industry, and he enjoys helping passionate people come together and solve them. Thanks for being here, Anthony. Let's get started. You have 3 companies. What one do you want to talk about first?
Well, I think the one that's the center that kind of allows me to do what I do is Protagonist Games. And the other companies have sort of come out of those efforts. And Protagonist came about just because of the experiences I've had in the game industry and my last sort of corporate role, and realizing that I sort of need to be in charge of my own destiny again. And, I founded that company in, I think, 2018. And its initial vision, part of the initial vision was that it was always going to be remote. So I'd done so much work early in my career in the online space, and then just throughout my games industry career, people are all over the place. It was never everybody's in one office. And I thought, as an entrepreneur, hey, I could really reduce costs and let people work from home, which they like, especially a lot of the sort of engineers and people that need to focus. They like just having their own space and being able to do that. Yeah. And so I thought I was really onto something. And for a good, 2 years, that was just us, Now everybody was doing it.
Well, they're not. No, they're doing
they're going back. Yeah. Which that's a real estate problem, not an actual, how to work together.
Yeah. It's a big controversy right now. So you will be staying fully remote.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless I end up in a situation where the team wants to be together, needs to be together. And we could always make those accommodations. But our DNA is that we work remote, and yesterday we had our company holiday party and for, folks that are in Southern California, and a bunch of people, drove and got together and had lunch and all that kind of stuff. And people in other states were on virtually. And, maybe next year we'll go to a different area of the country and do the same thing. But yeah, I think that, people stay with the company and enjoy the company because partially that fact, they really enjoy being able to work from home and the flexibility that it gives them. And actually, I found that people are more productive in that role if you have the right people. But a lot of the right people in the game industry like to work that way.
Definitely. And I think a lot of companies are doing RTO except for their high performer or their shiny person who then they allow to be remote. And that's so hard too.
That has always been one of the indicators that made me think that this was going to be a good idea, because I'd seen that too at companies before this trend where there's just some badass software engineer and she needed to be working from home, and you weren't going to let her go. You're going to be like, okay, we've solved this problem. Like, okay, if we could solve it for one person, we could probably solve it for everybody.
Can you talk more about what Protagonist actually does, what you're working on?
Sure. Yeah. So Protagonist is a we're an independent game developer that does work for hire, right? We help other people with their projects. And that came about because through my career, I'm actually going to turn 50 next at the beginning of 2024. So I've been thinking, reflecting a bit, right? So I had a couple of times started companies using work for hire as a way to create, to bootstrap for capital.
Yeah.
And then focused on the game that we were going to make and raising capital that way, and moved away from that kind of work. And then in some cases, when things didn't work out the way we had hoped, gone back to work for hire to keep the doors open, and found that was very effective as well. And but I always saw it as the thing you fall back on. But I was always able to do it, and I was always very fulfilling to find people that had a problem that needed solving, being able to bring teams together to do that. So I said, this time I'm going to focus on that. That's actually going to be what I do, and it's been great. And we're currently working with some great companies like Visual Concepts. We got to ship WWE 2K23 with a fantastic team working on their multiplayer features. And we've worked with, Electronic Arts and a bunch of different great companies. And that has provided, a great form of stability for a network of game developers who are very experienced, very reliable, like a different challenge.
Yeah.
Um, and I like to say we're trying to create a forever home for unicorns. And people seem to appreciate that. So
Yeah. And I imagine your team likes to work on hard problems, and
yeah,
like they get
yeah,
to jump around and solve a bunch of different hard problems.
yeah. We are, we're not like there are great companies out there that are sort of lower cost game devs, content builders, and that kind of thing. We're more sort of the high end, really hard engineering problems, advanced design challenges. We like to be involved in helping particularly difficult technical challenges, everything from back end scaling for like, we did some work with big, like corporations that may like retail that want to do augmented reality for their stores eventually and roll that out across the world, and helping them figure out how to scale their back end, because there's so many similarities to that kind of service as there is to running an MMO.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Same problem in a different context.
yep. Yeah.
And then what about simulation theory?
So sim theory, so the name is kind of a hint at what we're doing there. It came out of Protagonist Games. So I'd worked with my co-founder Randy Cully and a few other people for years. Right, we've known each other for 15 years, and worked on some game engine technology in the past. And the name simulation theory is, simulation theory is the idea that we're all already in the matrix, right? And some people subscribe to that idea. Elon Musk will talk about it, and he has a rule. He's talked about having a rule with his brother. They don't talk about simulation theory in the hot tub or something like. But if you wanted to create an interactive experience that was so realistic that you couldn't tell the difference between it and reality, you would have to be able to use all of the compute power, local, remote, available to you. And that's really what we focus on, is unlocking the compute power around you, because it's kind of a dirty little secret that most game engines that exist today don't scale very well across multiple cores on a CPU. So if you're a gamer, like a PC gamer, and you bring up your task manager and you look at your CPU utilization when you're playing a game, you'll often notice you might have a 12 core machine or something, but only 3 of them are really doing anything. And it's a hard problem to solve. Like parallel compute and distributed compute are tough topics, and games are already hard. So there are a lot of problems to solve. And we've had, a lot of great hardware to work with. So it hasn't necessarily been the primary thing that people are worried about. But as, people try to create bigger, richer experiences with, AI, generative AI in real time, more ultra realistic experiences. I think about games like Cyberpunk, which I really enjoyed. but you go out into the world of the crowd and you go to a vendor and you're like, I wonder how much I can interact with this character, right? And there are always very clear limitations on what can be done in a simulation these days. Our goal is to unlock the potential that's already on everyone's desktop. And so our technology is able to scale up over 1,024 cores on a CPU, which you can't even get yet, but also scale across multiple computers, locally and remote, which is really exciting. So that's technology that we've been developing for basically the guys came to me at Protagonist Games and said, we want to work on this problem again. And we have an idea, a new architecture about how to do it.
Hmm.
And so I let them work 1 day a week on it for about 2 years until we found a customer that had a problem. They're using an existing game engine and they were doing some kind of dance game. And they can only get, a handful of characters on the screen at the frame rate that they wanted. And we were able to use this new technology to literally do tens of thousands of animations on screen on the same hardware.
Wow.
That really cemented to me that this was gonna be something. And so we decided to spin that out as its own company called Simulation Theory.
Great. Yeah, you found a need. You did some testing.
Yeah.
And everybody there many people from simulation theory come from Max Play. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of and all of them right now, all of them. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
I was researching Max Play
that's
before
right.
our podcast,
That's
and I
right.
saw this incredible video on YouTube called
Yeah,
Introducing Max Play Game Development Suite. And at one point, someone's like, it's like Google Docs for game development. And then they throw the phone over their shoulder.
that's Francisco. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
also looking at the team, like what a crazy, incredible team. You have David Yee from Gorilla Tag, Sinjin at Tencent, Bill Young at Twitch. Like so many
Mhm.
people have gone on to
Some of my favorite people. Yeah.
do the craziest things. Can you share a little bit about Max Play? Because I feel like that has such
Sure.
an
Yeah.
influence
No,
on what you're
that
doing,
it's
right?
part of the backstory, and so I had been at EA. So EA had acquired my company, Heatwave Interactive, and we became EA Mobile in Austin.
Oh,
And I did that for a little while, and then um, just the corporate world wasn't has never been my happy place.
yes.
I there are times where it has been great, and there are a couple of times I actually worked at EA where I was some of my best memories, but they were very entrepreneurial times in those companies. So anyway, I decided to start doing work for hire again. Got hired as a consultant at Max Play, and Max Play's offices were my old Heatwave offices from my prior startup.
Perfect.
Small world, Austin, Texas, and Randy Cully, his game engine that he wrote was the foundation for that. So Technicolor bought it and incubated Max Play, and then spun it out as its own startup. And I had met Randy at Heatwave. He was my head graphics guy, and he's brilliant.
Oh.
Yeah. So small world.
And the backstory, I tried to recruit Randy when he left Max Play and went to Amazon for years. So
Oh yeah,
full
yeah,
circle.
yeah. So and rightly so. He's a
Yeah, he's a gem. He's someone you work on for a long time, but he's
yeah,
with you now, so I won't
yeah.
turn him away.
No, you can't have him. So I came in as a consultant at Max Play, and they're doing some amazing work, and they were doing two things really on the game engine side. One was a precursor to what we're doing at Sim Theory, which was this idea of scaling. And they could scale up like 24 cores or something like that, which is still a lot. And they were doing this sort of Google Docs for game development idea, which again came from a lot of our multiplayer experience working on MMOs. When I got started in the game industry as a game designer, and my first real game design job was on Ultima Online, and we were working in a client server environment. Like half the time, our work was in the software, almost like playing a multiplayer game with other developers going, did this work? Try this. And so that was a really cool idea. But but creating a game engine from the ground up with all of the problems that you could try to solve, from performance to workflow, was a tall order. And I think, Sinjin was the CEO when I joined. He and I had worked together at EA previously. Amazing guy, one of the most connected people I know in the space. And by the way, is on my board at Sim Theory, right? So at the moment that I realized we were going to try something similar, I wanted his involvement, and he's been great. So yeah, Max Play did some really great stuff. Unfortunately, we got to a point where they couldn't bridge their funding, because building a game engine from scratch to something that an independent game developer, or someone using Unity could switch to it, that's a tough job. That's a huge investment. I think it was our guess at the time was it was at least 30 million. And I think we probably got halfway there.
And then, I mean, think about what it would be now, probably much more.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so with Sim Theory, you sort of take those lessons in mind. Our goal is to help people who they can use our technology with a game engine they're already using in many cases.
Yeah.
So depending on what their challenges are, they're actually we're signing some contracts now with people that are using Unity or using Unreal, but they have very specific performance challenges with the software that if we take it and we really do what we do, or we scale it on hardware and then hand it back to the game engine, that can oftentimes really unlock a lot for them. So we're not asking people to natively switch over to our technology. We're trying to work with their workflows, because look, I know game developers, it's the hardest form of entertainment in the world, has all the problems.
Yeah.
And people want to keep their workflows and not have to figure something out new. And so our strategy is, we're going to enhance what you do, as opposed to try to make you start over.
Do you think that there will be another game engine that will, I hate the word disrupt, but disrupt the market? Do you think it's possible at this point?
That's funny. My cat muted me for a second. We have a kitten running around the office. Hello. So I do think it's possible. I think it's needed. I think it's also likely that anyone that comes along to disrupt is likely to try, someone will try to acquire them that's already a player in that space.
Yeah.
Which is okay, because for the user, that can, again, it helps not disrupt their flow. But despite how great the sort of industry leaders are in the engine space, the core architectures are still pretty old school. And so the limitations on trying to scale across many cores or be natively multi-node, it's really hard to go and change that while supporting all of your existing customers. So while it's not like our mission is to go unseat Unity or Unreal or anything like that, it is to solve some problems that they're not solving. And, if we get to the point where we have enough adoption and enough investment that we could be an entire solution, okay, great. We do believe that's the only way to get maximum performance out of the hardware, because I don't want to get too technical on the call. And also, I'm not a software engineer. I'm a self-taught hacker who got into the game industry. But the way we've structured our total package is pretty unique, and there'll be some patents in the process of being filed around that will give us some pretty cool advantages. But we don't see people wanting to use our solution natively.
Yeah,
it's replacement for years, which is fine. We have a great business to build.
Yeah, the best is yet to come.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to jump into the early days of your career. Your first job on LinkedIn is founding a company called Integrated Visions, and then you started another company called Internet Bookstores.
Yeah.
What were these companies? Was that like a precursor to Amazon kind of? What was
I
that?
have a funny Amazon story that goes with that. So if we go way back, right? So my dad was a chemist and then businessman working in the chemical industry. And my mom was a romance novelist. And so I guess that's how you get a game designer. You bring a scientist and a writer together, and
Yeah, it's true.
and I had lots of challenges in school in structure in the structure of school. But I was lucky enough to have great resources and you know enough wherewithal to go to the University of Texas and meet some fascinating people in the early 90s. And that's where I really got into realized that maybe I could make video games. I was on the Internet Relay Chat, IRC. She used to joke, stood for I repeat classes, but it was kind of like the Discord of today. And I met some other like-minded people who were, CS majors at UT and artists and that kind of thing. And I just realized I wasn't going to be able to finish college because I could be in a really interesting class like an astronomy course that and be in the like top couple of students and then just couldn't get myself to go to class for that American history 2 that I forgot to test out over.
We're the same. If I care, I really care. And if I don't care, I don't care at all.
Yeah. So unsurprisingly, later on in my life as an adult, I was diagnosed with ADHD, right? But I didn't know that at the time. All I knew is I was good at what I was interested in and very bad at things I wasn't interested in. And my solution for that was to find other people who were good at and interested in doing those other things.
Yeah.
And so I started to realize I was in Austin that maybe I could make games for a living. And so I called my dad and told him I was dropping out of the University of Texas, starting a video game company, and it's like working at as a lens tech at like Lens Crafters on the side. And then I had another gig as at a tech company doing software development, and while I paid for these other guys to work on our game at Integrated Visions. And at the same time, my mom, who I mentioned was an author, wanted a web page, a homepage, back in the day. And because we're talking like 94, 95, somewhere in there. And so I made something called the Internet Book Source where I could promote her books, put up excerpts, show the book covers, which ones are in stores now. And then all of her friends wanted a web page, a homepage, and some of them were New York Times bestsellers. And so I had 35, 40 authors on the Internet Book Source. And this is a true story. I was very much doing that as a hobby just for my mom and her friends. And I had this game company that I was building. And we had this great idea and we were working on it. And I get this email from this guy named Jeff who says that he's got a warehouse in the Amazon. This is how I read this, a warehouse in the Amazon. And if I wanted to, I could let people order through our site and he could fulfill the book shipments at a much lower cost. And I was like, that doesn't make any damn sense. Like, how are you going to ship books from another continent? And it was literally an email from Jeff Bezos. My wife framed that a few years later and put it on the wall. And won't let me live it down. But I wasn't trying to
No, Jeff.
Who is this guy with a warehouse in the Amazon? So yeah, true story. And that's kind of that's kind of life. It's like you never know what's going to happen, or you have to make decisions based on what you're interested in. And but the website did really well for a while and was really helpful for my mom and her friends. And then I got what you get when you don't get what you want from a startup, which is experience.
You built
right?
Character like Calvin and Hobbes.
That's right. We built character. So I learned a lot about starting a company and running a company, and about the relationships and the pressures that go into that. So my partner, who was the software engineer, just had some stuff that happened, and it made it so that we couldn't really run the company. And I was like, well, I'm going to go get a job in the game a real job in the game industry. And I managed to find a job at Origin in QA. And that was a fantastic experience. There's some legendary stuff that happened there too, but I met Warren Spector, who really inspired me to really move into game design, because the only job I could get at first was in QA. And but some of the people I met in QA in the mid 90s are still great relationships now, and they're doing amazing things in the industry. Creative directors, executive producers, and I learned a lot in that phase. And it was also very much a different time in the 90s. So there's some drama there. Like, it's like, can I tell this story? When I went there to the job fair, you went into this like fishbowl, and everyone was sitting there like, waiting to be called for their interview. It was just off the lobby from the entrance. And I was the last person in the room. And after about 20, 25 minutes, nobody had come in to call my name. And I waited another like 45 minutes or something, right? And like, okay, I don't know what's going on. I go out of the room and there's nobody there. They left. And so I was like, what? So I went up to the elevator, and there was I think it was the third floor of the Origin building, to go to the parking lot or whatever. And I come out the elevator on the third floor, and I hear people talking. It's a Saturday, so that should tell you something, that people are working. And so I just wander into this office where people are working at Origin on Saturday. And a woman says, can I help you? And I said, oh, I was here for the job fair. Nobody ever called my number. And she's like, oh my gosh, did we forget you? And I'm like, yes. She goes, I can't believe we did that. Do you still want a job? Well, what do you have? She goes, well, I have a QA job. Sure. Can you start on Monday? Sure. So that's
Wow.
how I got my first job in the industry. And then 2 days later, Warren Spector comes by, who's the producer of the game I'm working on. And he's like, oh, I hear you're our new QA guy. What were you doing before this? I'm like, well, I had my own game company. And he said, oh, really? And I said, yeah. And he goes, did you make a game? I said, well, we've got a demo.
Yeah.
Because you should bring it by. So I brought it by the next day and showed him hover blades. And he's like, what are you doing in QA?
Yeah.
It's the only job I could get. It's a funny story, but I ended up having to stay in QA because of a policy about QA people not moving into development for the first year.
Oh.
And then suddenly wasn't employed a year later. That was a strange thing that happened. And then they brought me back as a game designer a couple of years after that. So
Well, it all worked out.
it all worked out.
I want to highlight this because sometimes I talk to younger people. I mean, no, I recruit people that are a lot more senior, but many college grads reach out to me to help
Yeah.
me find a job.
Yeah.
And I point them to some resources on my podcast. Listen to Sonia Michaels. There's some great stuff. But I think it's really important to highlight that you had your own company and then you worked in QA for a year. And I'm sure you made so many great connections and
I did.
started your career there. And so many people do. But I think it's okay to work in QA. It's great to work in QA as your first
You
job,
learn
right?
you learn so much in QA if you have the right attitude.
Yes. Yeah.
As a collaborator, as someone who's curious and wants to help, you can learn so much, because you learn about production, you learn about how the different systems work together, how the teams work together. You learn how devs think and communicate. And so, I'm not saying that's the best place to start, but it is a good place to start if that's what you can get. And in my situation, right, there were politics, and people were mad that I got offered to be a game designer after a couple of days there, and actually got fired on a technicality exactly 1 year later. So there's some drama or whatever. But I ended up back there as a lead game designer in Ultima Online. So, but yeah, I also had a demo, right? I had rolled up my sleeves and I had a startup, and we made a demo with what we could learn. And it was, if you looked at it now, you'd laugh at that piece of software. But to a producer who was talking to a QA guy,
Yeah.
oh, here's what you've done. What did you learn? Why did you do it this way? Oh, this this kid's pretty smart. Maybe, you know what, we've got an entry level design position. You should apply for that. So yeah, I definitely think rolling up your sleeves and trying to make games is 100% the right thing to do if you're trying to break into this industry.
Yeah.
Now there's so many more tools.
Yeah. But I think there's no excuse for why you don't have a portfolio together when you're an
Yeah,
entry level person and applying for a job.
yeah.
I always send people to Global Game Jam. I think that's great. And you can make
Mhm.
a game with other people, meet new people, find a mentor, have something to show. But it's not, you have to put in work.
That's the challenge though, right? 'Cause making games is a team sport. It's like, you
Yeah.
know, your portfolio, and that's the other thing. If you have a portfolio, it's really important to point out what it is that you contributed.
Yep.
It's not always obvious.
Yeah, and people can make assumptions on many things, but if you just have a bunch of stuff on your portfolio and you don't say what you did and didn't do, I've heard hiring managers are upset because they feel like maybe this person is trying to take credit for work they didn't do. So,
I mean, that's one lens to look at it through. The lens that I would look at it through is how good of a communicator is this person?
yeah, there's many issues, but you don't know what people are going to think or the lens which they're going
Yeah,
to look
well, that's
through.
my point,
So
right? Like,
overly explain.
yeah, if I'm the hiring manager and I see like a video footage of a scene in a game, without an explanation, it's like, did they make the video?
yeah.
Did they make the character? Did they animate it? Did they do the text? Maybe they're the lighting. There's so much that you have to ask. And so the question is immediately, how good of a communicator is the candidate? How well
Yeah.
do they think about what they're trying to communicate more
Yep.
than
I
anything
think
else?
that's a good rule for anything, though. I mean, if you have an interesting career change, you have a gap in history, people are going to make assumptions.
Yeah.
That's kind of your job is to judge someone when you're recruiting or you're the hiring manager. So overly explain, hey, this took care of my family, had a kid, went back to school, decided I wanted to change careers. That's all fine. But if you say nothing, that's when it's
Yeah.
not.
People
I mean,
fill
it
in the
is fine, but people assume and
Yeah.
they may think it's not fine.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
I want to hear more about Ultimate Online. I had Raf on my podcast and he
Yeah.
had some great stories about working in the cold and typing with fingerless gloves. Were you fingerless gloving?
I don't remember that story,
Okay.
but there's so many. Yeah. Ultima Online was fascinating. Like, so I was at the end of my QA stint there. I was spending my evenings hanging out in Raf's office with his wife and some other people that were working on the project, learning about the game because the day before I got let go, I was going to become the lead tester for Ultima Online, and so it was kind of a crushing thing to leave, but I came back as a game designer on that project. So yeah, it was a fascinating um, experience to work that early on something that groundbreaking. Um, and mistakes were made and things were learned. But I have nothing but fond memories of that and working with Raf, who's brilliant. And again, more people from from those projects that like today, right now at Protagonist Games, one of my senior engineers was a server programmer on Ultima Online.
Wow.
You know, those relationships and knowing what people are capable of and what they've done in the past is so helpful in being able to figure out what can be done in the future. So,
What stories do you have about what went right, what went wrong, your learnings?
um, well, one of the interesting things about that project was, and one of the reasons I was able to get hired as a game designer on it was that they were primarily Unix based, and I taught myself programming essentially through scripting, shell scripting, and scripting bots on IRC and stuff, almost all in Solaris and VAX and VMS, and so the environment in which we worked was very unusual for game development because it was writing code in Unix, on a Unix platform, but taking advantage of that very powerful platform to be able to do things in real time and do them quickly. And so, but as far as things that we learned about, I mean, I learned a lot about community management from that, right? As I became a lead designer very quickly, learning to communicate with the audience and figure out that balance between transparency and openness, but not overpromising, and getting that balance right and figuring out who to listen to and who not to listen to. Uh, there's a lot of learning there, and so people who know me in the space, especially from that time, like to bring up one of my biggest mistakes in that, which was we were doing an expansion, and rumor had gotten out about what that expansion was, and uh, it was distracting the team because the community was getting all worked up about it, and uh, the rumor was technically wrong, but essentially right. And I got on there and said, "You all are wrong," and I shouldn't have, because technically, yeah, they were wrong, but the thing that was upsetting them, the thing that made them think about it a certain way, they were right. But I was trying to take the pressure off the team.
Right.
And so, ultimately the game came out and it did well. But the thing that I said didn't ring as true. And, I had a great mentor at the time, and someone who was brought in by Gordon Walton, who I know you've interviewed as well.
Yeah, Gordon's so great.
Yeah. And, I learned a lesson there that I wanted to protect my team. I wanted them to be able to focus. I was frustrated with the trolls,
Yeah.
and I let it get to me in a way that caused me to mislead the audience. And you can't do that. You cannot do that. So either shut up or be willing to tell them what's actually going on. And I prefer the latter. Like, this is transparency.
Feel like you could use that lesson in relationships too.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe don't tell them you're wrong.
Yeah, and I was in my early 20s, and it was the Wild West, and
Yeah.
but yeah, there's a lot of learning from that. I mean, you could talk about Ultima Online for weeks, just because it was one of the first to really have all these challenges,
Yeah.
including the technical environment, which was fascinating. We had things like, as a game designer, you don't think about things the way a software engineer does, and you're like, oh, I've got the ability to like shrink this piece of art down and make it, and like, oh, I could take this horse and I could shrink it down and make it a statue with just a little script code and scale it, and like, you know, uh, then everybody in the game ends up with a horse statue, and the engineers come and get mad at you because all those horses have horse AI on them, and they're all thinking like horses, even though they're not doing anything. Like, oh yeah, I guess we need to do that a little bit differently. So figuring out the difference between prototyping something and making it production worthy. There are a lot of lessons in Ultima Online about that, because the tech was so powerful. You do almost anything, but you maybe shouldn't do some of those things, right? But you would prove the concept and then work with the engineers, and they'd figure the right way to actually implement it. But that prototyping to production pipeline and experience of trial and error, and how to work with a team, and how to decide when something is, the production process for taking something from an idea to the customer, was incredible learning experience for me.
I want to also talk about Heatwave because you touched on that earlier, and then that it was required by EA. What was Heatwave, and what can you talk about in terms of the acquisition?
Yeah, so it was what we call a soft landing.
Okay.
So I had done I had great opportunities at EA, did some amazing things because of Ultima Online.
Yeah.
Ended up relocating out to the West Coast, to San Francisco, and relocating most of the team from Austin to San Francisco.
Can you touch on that too? How did you manage to relocate the team? I feel like that's an important piece for people that are trying to do RTO right now.
So I don't know what the right term is, but I've been very lucky with teams, and having really great relationships with the teams that I work with. And I guess, people matter to me. And I don't know what it is about my upbringing, about the way that I grew up. I mentioned I was My mom was a romance novelist. My dad's a chemist. Also, my mom is a Black woman from Texas and Arkansas, who passes, as they say, but she's Black. My dad is an Italian kid from Brooklyn in New Orleans, and they met at Howard. And so I grew up in Texas as a biracial kid. Um, and I guess I always kind of felt like I was on the outside of a lot of things. And so I spent a lot of time empathizing, I think, with people who feel on the outside. Um, and I think that helped me build up a skill set for just really wanting to understand and um, sort of connect with people and their motivations and what they're trying to do. And so I do still, I do a lot of that in my spare time, helping people in this industry or get in this industry. And it's also partially, I think, why I spend so much time with solving problems the way I like to. It's about, helping other people. So that's a long preamble to say, I think I had really good trust and understanding with the team. And the decision to relocate or to shut down Origin was out of our hands.
Yeah.
But there were other teams at Origin who did not relocate. They broke up. They went other places. But the core, the majority of the UO team relocated to the Bay Area. And I think a lot of that had to do with understanding the value of Ultima Online still, because it was, I think originally the forecast was 6 months and we were on year 5, and we were profitable every year and still breaking records. And so I kind of went to everyone to figure out what they needed to relocate. And I brought that back to corporate and I negotiated very hard.
Of course. I feel like that's you.
So yeah, and still friends with a lot of those people. Most of us didn't end up staying in the Bay Area, but some did. But this gets to Heatwave in that I learned a lot about business in that phase of my career at EA. I had a great mentor who sat me down and was like, this is how corporate financials work.
Oh.
This is what a P&L is. This is, and so eventually I became a producer and I owned the P&L, the profit and loss sheet, and this is what EBITDA is and why it matters, right?
Fun business stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, all this business stuff, which I love.
Yeah.
When I started my first company, I was like, I had little MBA books and I was into it. And then I took a job to help Codemasters build their online gaming group in the UK. So I relocated with my family to the UK, and we launched some of the first free-to-play Korean games in the West. And then we were the publisher for Dungeons and Dragons Online in Europe and Lord of the Rings Online in North America and Europe. And I was very quickly able to come in and build a lot of value for that company and realize that, hey, I'm not really participating in the value that I'm creating. And
A different mindset. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, as I flew around the world looking for projects to sign and publish, literally around the world, once I'd circumnavigated the world in 10 days on a business trip, I would come into a game studio and, very quickly be able to go, okay, this is what's great. And this is what isn't. And usually there were a couple of things that were obvious to me that were missing and why, this was going to be a problem or what needed to be solved. And I built a lot of relationships doing that. But I had this knack for being able to come into a game development environment and go, well, if you change this and this, and they'd be like, oh, and then they do that. And then, things would be much better. So I decided, well, maybe I should just be doing that for myself. So I met a like-minded individual who had been the CEO of some other startups in the interactive space and had a couple of exits. He made a great candidate as the CEO. I had this idea about making MMOs that were so at the time you have World of Warcraft and you had some great sci-fi MMOs, mostly fantasy and sci-fi, and nothing sort of in the context of could I relate to it in an everyday context. This is sort of a metaverse idea, right? Like getting Pizza Hut delivered in World of Warcraft didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But if you could create a an online game experience that was in the context of the modern world, suddenly there are a lot of commercial opportunities that were really interesting that could add value to the experience and also help fund these really expensive games, right?
Yeah.
So our goal was to go out and raise like $150 million to do several MMOs, and we had specific concepts and we packaged them all up. But the way that I started that is I bootstrapped it using consulting, right? And so we made $1 million in the first year, just three of us. And that was a lot of money in 2006, 7, whatever it was.
It's like $2 million today.
Yeah, exactly. And for just a couple of people in Texas, right? And so the cost of living was lower. It was great. And that meant we didn't have to have jobs, right? So we could work on this idea. And so eventually, my partner and I, we did the whole Sand Hill Road, New York, East Coast. There wasn't a lot of VC funding for video games in Texas. And we eventually found a couple of VCs that really bought into the idea, and we ended up going with one and raised $7.5 million in the Series A. And then it was 2008. In May of 2008 is when we raised that money, which for those of you that don't remember, that's the great recession, the housing collapse. And we were going to turn around and go and raise $150 million for private equity, and it was gone. It just disappeared. So at the same time, there's some other trends happening. Mobile gaming was starting. Facebook gaming was huge. So by 2010, we had taken some of these ideas and adapted them to mobile and social gaming. And I learned a lot in that experience about, I did the first digital download deal in the music industry with Universal Music. We got an incredible split that no one will ever get again. And we had, all kinds of amazing artists for the IP that we were building. And I got to know the music industry. And, it's like, I was on a video shoot for T.I.'s music video with Rihanna. And it's crazy.
Cool.
And we did a lot of amazing stuff, but we couldn't raise that capital to do what we wanted. And we really had a core MMO PC console sort of game group. And, learned very quickly that the things that worked in social and mobile didn't match one-to-one and didn't match the motivations of a lot of the people who were working at the company at the time. So we had to go through a pretty strong transition. And in that process of raising the money and building all this and having a board, and I had the former president of Lucasfilm on the board, and all kinds of amazing stuff. But the board made me the CEO and made me fire my partner. It was a trial by fire. I learned a lot about that and about myself. And when we couldn't raise additional capital the way we needed to, and our VC was even struggling, we were one of the last portfolio companies that was still operating by, was it 2012, 2013? We went back to work for hire, and we did a bunch of great work. And EA was one of our clients.
Oh.
And they liked what we were doing so much that they decided to scoop us up. So it wasn't the big exit everybody was looking for, but I took care of all my people. They all got raises. They all got jobs at a great company, working on some really cool stuff. And I got to work again with someone. My boss was Chip Lang, who I had met previously at EA, who used to run EA Sports. He's on that team that's in the game. It's in the game. That thing. He had come to online, and I really liked him, and he was the guy that I ended up working for. And now he's the CEO of one of my other startups, which is High Def. So
Full circle.
small world.
Yeah. And you kind of boomeranged. You had a lot of EA in your career.
I worked at EA 4 times. I worked other places too, though. Sony and
Yeah, I don't even have a word for that. Quadruple boomerang. That's
They
amazing.
tried to recruit me again. I think 4 was enough. I think.
Yeah. No, that'd be funny. You can just hop back and forth. I've never seen that. I've seen a lot of different profiles, but I don't think I've seen 4 times. So congrats.
Hey, it's different experience every time for different reasons. But I learned a lot.
Company.
Yep.
Built character, learned a lot. Tell me about your best. I don't like to ask about regrets, but if you were to tell yourself something when you were younger that you've learned now, or somebody that wants to start their own company, what learnings? I'm sure you've had so many. What's the top advice that you would give them?
The people that you go into business with matter the most. And before you decide how to organize your company, really make sure that you understand who you're going into business with as much as possible, or understand how much you don't know that, and factor that in as a risk. Because starting a company, it's like a marriage, first of all, and it can be incredibly tough. And you might think you know someone and their motivations, but you don't really know until things get difficult. Your $10 million guaranteed deal disappears because someone's stock price drops 80% because of market forces you have no control over.
For instance,
you don't know how people are going to behave. So I would say just really be clear with yourself about who you're going into business with, what they're going to do for the company and why, and make sure as best you can that all those things are aligned. And the second piece that goes to that is make sure you have a great lawyer. And I don't mean, some people might hear that and think, oh, so you can sue people. No, find a great lawyer who's got lots of experience working with startups and can give you great advice about how to set up the company and about how to navigate the challenges that you will inevitably face. Because I've had a couple of fantastic attorneys that I don't think I could have done half the things I've done without them.
Yeah. I love my attorney. She's very helpful. She helps me with all kinds of things.
Yeah. And you're on the right path when your attorney wants to invest too. But seriously, I don't care if you're, 20 and starting your first company, a good attorney isn't going to try to drain you dry, because there's no value in that for them. If you can find the right attorney who wants to help you in your scenario and has a history of doing that kind of thing, I didn't get that advice early on. Luckily, I found that pretty quickly.
How did you find your lawyer? Referral? I always like to get referrals for those kind of things.
Referral. Yeah. Absolutely. I'll plug mine. Jason Jones at Shepherd Mullen is fantastic. So I don't know if you're going to leave that in, but in all seriousness, word of mouth. I have 2, right? I have a general counsel that works with me at, 3, I guess, at a lot of my companies when I'm getting started. And I have a corporate attorney in Jason Jones. And now I have a new great counsel at Rack Law Firm in LA. And so, it's really important.
It is. Yeah. I have one last question. You mentioned some of your mentors. Who are your mentors? Or who have been your strongest mentors? I'm sure there's a lot. And is the best advice that they've given you?
So when I started Heatwave, I wasn't the CEO. I was the co-founder. I was the talent, is what they called it, right? And then I became the CEO because I was doing the job, and my partner wasn't able to do it the way it was needed to be done. And I went out and I found an executive coach. He's not doing it anymore. He's retired, but another good piece of advice is, find a mentor. And it took me 6 months to find this executive coach. I interviewed a bunch of people, and I had to find one that kind of got me and that seemed to give me what I needed. One of the things I find challenging is, I guess, because of my personality, not everyone feels comfortable, telling me hard things, right? I don't think I'm scary, but, I have a strong personality, and so I need someone who's going to tell me like it is. I don't need people to tell me what I already think necessarily, right? And he wasn't from my industry, actually. He was from another industry, but he was a business person, and he understood business.
Yeah.
And the best piece of advice he gave me at the time, and he gave me a lot, was he said, Anthony, I've looked at your business. I've interviewed your team. I've looked at your business plan. You guys are brilliant. You guys can do anything. You can do anything you want to do, but you cannot do everything you want to do.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, focus.
Yeah.
And do that. Because I believe you set your mind to doing something and you'll do it. But he was pointing out, like, hey, you're trying to do 3 things.
Right.
Do one and do it the best of your ability. That was great advice. It's always good advice. Focus is always good advice, especially with someone with ADHD.
Yeah.
But that's also came to inform some of how why I have multiple companies, which is, you can't focus on multiple problems in one company especially as a startup, right? It's too many things to try and accomplish. So I decided, like, look, if I'm going to help a group of people solve a problem, it needs to be its own thing. And then as it grows and matures, maybe it's going to have a different leader. Chip Lang's the CEO of High Def now, not me. And so that's really informed my approach to a lot of things going forward. It's really good advice.
That is good advice. Yeah. I feel like that's the death of so many startups, trying to do too many things.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been talking to Anthony Castoro, a CEO and co-founder of Simulation Theory, owner of Protagonist Games, and chairman of High Def. Anthony, where can people go to learn about all of your companies or contact you?
Well, they can always contact me on LinkedIn. That's an easy place. If you want to know more about Sim Theory, you can go to simtheoryinc.com and check out our website, which we'll be updating shortly because our first public announcement and release is coming out. But yeah, you can always find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks so much for listening to the show this week. To catch all the latest from Here's Waldo, you can follow us on LinkedIn. Be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. We'll see you next time.